It started as an ordinary Thursday. Julia Weaver, 23 and recently graduated, was supposed to take the 5:45 p.m. express train from Penn Station to visit her parents in Hartford. She was running late, thanks to a last-minute meeting at her internship. The subway was packed, the turnstiles jammed, and by the time she reached the platform, the 5:45 was just pulling away. She groaned, tugged her duffel strap higher, and checked the board. A train to Albany via Springfield was leaving in 5 minutes from track 13. That's where her story veered off track, literally. Instead of waiting for the next Hartford-bound express, Julia made a split-second decision to hop on the Springfield train. It wasn't a huge detour, just an extra hour or two, and she figured she could Uber from there if needed. She called her mom to say she'd be a little late, but the call didn't connect. She shrugged and figured she'd try again from the train. But that second call never came. Neither did Julia. The train arrived in Springfield on schedule, passengers filed out, and conductors did their routine walkthrough. Julia was not among them. Her duffel bag wasn't in the overhead bins. No one recalled seeing her after the first stop. Her parents assumed she had simply changed plans, but when she didn't arrive by midnight, panic set in. By morning, Julia's face was on missing person posters. Cameras showed her entering the train in New York, but there was no footage of her exiting anywhere. The investigation spiraled. Police searched every inch of the route. The conductor and staff were questioned. Dogs sniffed through luggage cars, but there was nothing. No bag, no body, no trace. For weeks, her face was everywhere. National news picked it up, the train that swallowed a girl. Tips came in, wild theories spread. Some said she'd eloped. Others whispered about cults or abduction rings. Her family refused to give up. Years passed. Her bedroom was kept intact, her number never disconnected. Every holiday, her mother still set a plate for her. Every year, her case went colder. Until one phone call 12 years later made everything impossible to ignore again. The call came on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day where the sky feels heavy and the world moves slower. Julia's father, Mark Weaver, was sorting through mail when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, area code from upstate New York. He almost let it go to voicemail but answered with a tired, "Hello?" On the other end was a woman with a soft, almost trembling voice. "Mr. Weaver?" she asked. I think I've seen your daughter." Mark froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. He hadn't heard Julia's name from a stranger in years. "Where?" he asked, barely breathing. The woman explained she worked as a receptionist at a wellness retreat near Cooperstown. A guest checked in under the name Jules W., and while registering, had mentioned being from Connecticut. She looked like the girl on the poster. I recognized her eyes. Her smile, the woman said, voice cracking. Mark took down the address, thanked her, and called the authorities before even telling his wife. Detectives treated it cautiously. Dozens of tips over the years had led nowhere. But something about this one felt different. The retreat, tucked away in forested hills, catered to people seeking digital detoxes, trauma recovery, or just total disconnection. No phones, no internet. Some even stayed for months. By the time police arrived, Jules W. had already left. The name wasn't on any official documents, payments were made in cash. But the receptionist had taken a photo with her, just a casual selfie for memories. She texted it to Mark. He opened the image on his phone and dropped it. His wife ran over, picked it up, and gasped. It was Julia. Older, hair shorter, with a serenity in her eyes he didn't recognize, but it was her. No doubt. The police launched a renewed search. Photos were sent to airports, bus terminals, and train stations. Her face, now aged a decade, resurfaced on screens across the Northeast. Then came the second break. A gas station attendant in Vermont claimed he'd seen her the week prior, traveling alone, quiet, carrying a backpack. She looked peaceful, like someone who didn't want to be found, he said. It was both hopeful and confusing. Why hadn't she called? Why vanish for so long? Had she forgotten them? Or worse, did something happen to make her stay away? As her parents tried to make sense of it, detectives traced Julia's last known path and followed it north toward the Canadian border. The trail led them through sleepy towns and quiet motels, where receipts and vague witness statements began to paint a puzzle with too many missing pieces. A bus station in Montpelier confirmed a woman matching Julia's description had purchased a one-way ticket to Sherbrooke, Quebec, just over the border. She used cash. No ID. Surveillance footage showed her waiting alone, face half hidden beneath a knit cap, hands wrapped around a paper cup. The timestamp was just 5 days old. Authorities notified the RCMP, who picked up the investigation on the Canadian side. The Weavers, gripped by both hope and dread, were told to wait. But waiting had never been kind to them. They packed bags and drove up themselves. Sherbrooke was quiet in March. Slush clung to sidewalks and maple trees stood bare. They showed the photo of Julia, now Jules, to everyone they passed: cafe servers, library staff, street vendors. Most shook their heads. A few offered vague maybes. Then, at a small used bookstore near Rue Wellington, a clerk paused. "She was here," he said. "Bought a journal and a French phrasebook." She asked if there were any quiet hostels nearby. He gave them a name: Le Chien Blanc. It was a modest old house turned hostel, overlooking a frozen creek. The Weavers arrived breathless, palms damp with anticipation. The receptionist confirmed someone matching Julia's photo had checked in as Juliette White. She left that morning. Left a note too. Mark's hands trembled as he unfolded it. It wasn't addressed to him, but it was unmistakably Julia's handwriting. The note read, "To whoever finds this, I'm grateful for the silence. Please don't look for me. I'm safe. I've made peace with the noise I left behind." Tears streamed down Evelyn Weaver's face as she read those words again and again. Safe. Made peace. But what did that mean? What noise? The RCMP theorized voluntary disappearance. No foul play. Adults had the right to walk away. But the Weavers couldn't accept that. Julia had loved her family. She would never just leave unless something or someone pushed her to. That theory gained weight when a private investigator hired by the Weavers uncovered a name: Dr. Lenora Chase, a trauma psychologist linked to the same retreat Julia stayed at. Records showed Julia had been a patient of Dr. Chase for 6 months prior to her disappearance. And Dr. Chase had suddenly moved to Nova Scotia 2 weeks ago, just as Julia resurfaced. The timing was too perfect, too suspicious. They decided to find her. Nova Scotia greeted them with wind-whipped coastlines and the smell of sea salt in the air, a sharp contrast to the endless waiting room their lives had become. Dr. Lenora Chase lived in a remote cottage near Lunenburg, according to the investigators' report. The drive there wound through pine forest and open sky, the kind of isolation that seemed almost designed to keep secrets buried. Mark and Evelyn arrived mid-morning, their car crunching over gravel as they pulled into the long, narrow driveway. The cottage was small, modest, painted a fading blue, with chimes dancing in the breeze. A woman opened the door before they could knock. Mid-60s, gray hair tied back, eyes sharp and cautious. "You must be the Weavers," she said calmly, as if she'd expected them. "I wondered how long it would take." Evelyn stepped forward. "Is she here?" Dr. Chase shook her head. "No. She left on her own. I haven't seen her in weeks." Mark's voice cracked. "You knew she was missing. Why didn't you come forward?" The woman sighed, motioned them inside. "It's not that simple. Julia came to me years ago under a different name, seeking help for trauma she hadn't even fully understood. She didn't remember all of it. It came in fragments, flashes during sleep, feelings of dread on trains, dissociation. It wasn't until months into our work that she connected it to that day. The train ride." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. "She was attacked?" Dr. Chase hesitated. "Not in the way you might think. There was no physical assault, no crime scene. But something happened. Someone spoke to her. Someone she knew. Someone she feared." "Who?" Mark demanded. "She never said. She buried it so deeply that even when it surfaced, she resisted naming it. But I suspect it was someone from her past. Not a stranger." That hit like a thunderclap. "You're saying it was someone we know?" Evelyn whispered. She believed if she went back, she'd be forced into silence again. That's why she ran. She needed to disappear to heal. And once she found peace, she didn't want it disrupted. Dr. Chase stood, walked to a shelf, and retrieved a notebook. "She left this with me. Said one day, if the time was right, I could share it with you." The notebook's cover was plain, black leather, corners worn. Inside, Julia's handwriting filled every page. Some entries were dated, others were simply thoughts, memories, dreams. One name came up again and again: Uncle Drew. The name hit like ice water. Uncle Drew, Andrew Weaver, was Mark's younger brother. A high school art teacher, bachelor, beloved by nieces and nephews, always the fun uncle. He'd never raised suspicion, never stepped out of line, not even once. Mark felt the floor tilt. He wanted to deny it, to rip out every page of the journal and burn it. But the truth was written in Julia's quiet confessions. "He always smiled too wide when no one was looking. He gave me a necklace and told me not to tell. He sat next to me on the train that day. I hadn't seen him in years." That was the last entry. The rest of the pages were blank. Evelyn read it in silence, her fingers trembling on the paper. She didn't remember it all, Dr. Chase reminded them gently. But her instincts knew. Something about him made her run. Mark refused to believe it at first. Drew had been at the family barbecue 2 days before Julia disappeared. He'd helped flip burgers, made everyone laugh with old camp stories. "Are you sure?" Mark asked, voice barely above a whisper. Could it be a dream? A false memory? Dr. Chase looked at him steadily. The brain often protects itself through fragmentation. But the emotional truth seeps through. Julia didn't invent fear. She carried it. That night, Mark and Evelyn checked into a hotel near Lunenburg, notebook between them, unable to sleep. In the morning, they called their lawyer. Then they called the police. Drew was placed under discreet surveillance. It wasn't enough to accuse him, but the police agreed to open a quiet inquiry. They looked into his travel history, his connections, his whereabouts on April 12, 2011. And there it was, buried in a forgotten toll record from the Mass Pike. Drew's license plate logged at a booth 2 hours north of New York City, the day Julia vanished. The alibi he'd once offered, that he'd spent the day at home grading papers, crumbled. When police asked him about it, Drew smiled thinly. "Memory's tricky," he said, "but I'm sure I didn't see Julia that day." He declined a polygraph, refused further interviews, then lawyered up. Suddenly, he took an unpaid leave from school and disappeared from social media. The Weaver family fell into chaos. Some relatives refused to believe it. Others admitted they'd always found Drew off. Meanwhile, Julia's trail went cold again, until a letter postmarked from Halifax arrived at her parents' door. No return address, just a single sheet of paper. It said, "I know what he did, but I'm not ready to come home yet. Please don't stop believing me." The letter sent Evelyn spiraling. She read it 100 times, memorized the slant of each word, the pressure of the pen on the paper, as if decoding a secret message hidden in Julia's strokes. "She's alive," she whispered each time, like a prayer. Mark was torn. Relief warred with rage. His brother, his own blood, might be the reason their daughter vanished for over a decade. He wanted to confront Drew, to demand the truth. But Drew had vanished. His phone went to voicemail. His modest apartment in West Haven stood dark. Neighbors said he left in a rush after a family emergency. The police issued a quiet alert, but with no warrant, they couldn't force action. That changed when Julia's journal was officially submitted as evidence. Though circumstantial, it pointed to a pattern of grooming behavior. And then, more pieces fell into place. A former student from Drew's past came forward anonymously, claiming he had once made her uncomfortable during a school trip. Another girl, now in her 20s, said he gave her a bracelet and sent her weird emails. None of it was criminal enough to press charges on its own, but the pattern painted a chilling picture. The police secured a search warrant. In Drew's garage, hidden in a locked cabinet behind paint cans and an old tool chest, they found boxes of photos, keepsakes, trinkets labeled with names. Julia's name was there, twice. One envelope held an old photo of her at 13, smiling at a lake, taken from a distance. It had clearly been printed from a zoom lens. The other was a pressed daisy, dried and brittle, with a note that read, "Jay's favorite." It was enough. An arrest warrant was issued. But Drew was gone. His car abandoned in a long-term lot in Vermont. No signs of struggle. No cameras. Just gone. And so was Julia, again. The investigators widened their net. The theory now was chilling. Had Drew found her? Had he followed her trail through Quebec and beyond? Was Julia still free, or hiding from him again? Her last known location remained Halifax. That's where Mark and Evelyn went next, fueled by desperation and a thin thread of hope. They checked hostels, women's shelters, even libraries, showing Julia's aged photo. And finally, in a tiny coastal cafe painted seafoam green, a waitress hesitated when they showed the photo. "She came in 3 nights ago," she said. "Didn't order anything. Just asked if we had a public bulletin board." She pointed to the wall. On it, buried among dog-walking ads and art class flyers, was a handwritten note pinned with a red pushpin. It read, "To Mom and Dad, I'll meet you when it's safe. I promise. I see you're close. Keep going. Jay." The note shook them to the core. Evelyn cried right there in the cafe, clutching the scrap of paper like a lifeline. Mark stood silent, eyes scanning the street outside as if Julia might appear any second. The waitress offered tea and quiet comfort, said Julia had worn a brown knit cap and had a faint scar on her cheek, something only her mother would have known was real. She looked tired, but calm, the waitress added, like someone who had just made peace with a very big decision. That night, the Weavers booked a room in town and didn't sleep much. Every knock on the door, every creak in the hallway stirred hope. Julia was here, somewhere nearby, but the days passed without another sign. The police in Halifax, now working closely with U.S. authorities, took the case more seriously. A woman resurfacing after over a decade, linked to an active warrant for her uncle, triggered a rare cross-border alert. But Julia wasn't considered a fugitive. She was a survivor, one who hadn't yet stepped into the light. Then, 5 days later, a package arrived at the cafe. No return address. The manager, recognizing the handwriting from the pinned note, called the Weavers. Inside the box were a pair of childhood ballet slippers, worn and scuffed, a USB drive, a sealed envelope marked, "Only when you're ready." The USB held video files, short clips, almost like therapy vlogs. Julia, speaking to the camera in various places, by a lake, in a dim room with rain tapping the window, in a quiet library. "I've recorded these in case I can't find the courage to say things in person," she began in one. "What happened to me? It's something I still can't say out loud. But I remember now. I remember his voice. The way he told me not to scream. I thought I imagined it all for years." Evelyn clutched Mark's arm. Julia's voice cracked in parts, steady in others. "I didn't run because I hated you. I ran because I thought I'd break you." The videos continued, each more raw than the last. Julia spoke of nightmares that wouldn't leave her, of guilt that clung like fog, and of moments she tried to convince herself none of it was real. "The hardest part wasn't the fear," she said in one clip. "It was the silence. Keeping it in made me feel like I didn't exist." She described fleeting joy, quiet days at a forest cabin, learning how to bake bread with an elderly woman in Montreal, a stray dog she almost kept. But underneath it all was always the same ache. "I wanted to call you 100 times. I dialed the number. I stood outside payphones. I sat outside train stations. But what if you didn't believe me? What if you thought I made it up?" In another video, her eyes searched the lens. "He smiled at me the whole ride. I was frozen. Not scared. Just gone. I disappeared before I even stepped off that train." The Weavers watched each clip together, pausing often to cry, to breathe, to hold each other. The sealed envelope sat untouched for 2 days. When they finally opened it, inside was a single folded map with one spot circled in red. "Whisper Bay, Wednesday at 6 p.m. No date, no explanation, just a time and a place." Whisper Bay was a coastal lookout 2 hours from Halifax, known for its dramatic cliffs and crashing waves. The next Wednesday, at 4 p.m., Mark and Evelyn arrived early, wrapped in coats against the wind. The ocean roared below them, and seagulls cried overhead. They waited in silence, watching the path behind them, every rustle in the trees raising their hopes. At 6:03 p.m., a figure emerged, hooded, cautious, moving slowly. Julia. Her face was thinner, more defined, but those eyes, those were her mother's eyes. Evelyn didn't wait. She ran. Julia dropped her bag and caught her mid-stride. They held each other without speaking for what felt like forever. Mark joined them, eyes wet. "I'm so sorry," Julia whispered. Evelyn stroked her hair. "You never have to be." They sat together on a driftwood bench as the sun melted into the Atlantic, casting gold across the cliffs. For a long time, they just listened, to the sea, to the wind, to the silence that wasn't silence anymore. When Julia finally spoke, her voice was steadier than her parents expected. "I've rehearsed this moment in my head for years," she said. "But nothing I practiced feels real now." Evelyn held her hand. "We don't need perfect words. Just truth." Julia nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Uncle Drew saw me at Penn Station. I was distracted, rushing. He called my name and smiled. Said he was visiting a friend in Albany and had just finished a teacher's conference. I hadn't seen him in so long. I didn't think it was strange. He bought me a coffee. We sat together. And then, just before the train pulled out, he sat next to me. That's when everything changed." She paused. Mark's jaw was tight, fists clenched. "He whispered things," Julia continued. "Reminded me of games we played when I was younger. Said he missed them. Said no one ever believed little girls anyway." Her voice wavered. "I got off at the second stop. Ran. I didn't even have my bag. I walked for hours. Slept on a church bench. Then a woman found me, took me to a shelter. I gave a fake name. I didn't know who I was anymore." Evelyn wept silently, trying not to crush Julia's hand in hers. "Why didn't you tell someone there?" Mark asked gently. Julia looked at him with tired eyes. "Because I was afraid he'd find me. And I didn't want you to look at me and see shame." Mark shook his head fiercely. "You're the bravest person I've ever known." They sat together until the stars came out. Julia handed them a slip of paper. "There's more I want to share. In therapy, I'm not ready to come home, but I'm close. I just needed you to know the truth. And to believe me." Evelyn pulled her into another hug. "We always have. We always will." The next day, Julia was gone. She left early, leaving behind a note in the hotel room her parents had offered. I'm not vanishing again. I just need space. You gave me something I never had, permission to heal out loud. I'll be in touch soon. I promise. Mark and Evelyn respected her choice. As much as they wanted to hold on, they knew chasing her now would only push her further. They returned to Connecticut with a new kind of hope, not of finding her, but of rebuilding trust and connection one layer at a time. Back home, the legal investigation into Drew gained momentum. The journal, video evidence, and testimony from other women created a strong enough foundation to pursue charges. The warrant was active and now international. It wasn't just about Julia anymore. It was about protecting others he may have hurt. Weeks passed. Then a call came from a hostel owner in Newfoundland. A man matching Drew's description had checked in under the name Daniel Ross. He had a rental car, paid cash, and asked odd questions about ferry schedules. By the time authorities arrived, the room was empty. But inside, Drew had left behind a notebook. In it were names, scribbles, phrases like, "They don't know everything," and "She still remembers too much." Disturbing, fragmented thoughts filled the pages. And one sentence appeared again and again: "She was supposed to forget." That changed everything. It was enough to label Drew as a credible threat. Julia was contacted through a secure email address she had shared with her therapist, who relayed the news. She agreed to be relocated temporarily to a safe house under police protection. It wasn't just for her safety, it was to give her space to testify when the time came. She didn't hesitate. "If I stay quiet now," she told the officer who picked her up, he winced, "I won't let that happen again." Back in Connecticut, Mark and Evelyn began preparing their home. Not just for Julia's return, but for the new version of their daughter. Stronger, wiser, forever changed, yet still somehow the same little girl who once danced in the living room barefoot. The trial date was set 6 months later. Drew was apprehended near a dockyard in Nova Scotia, attempting to board a cargo ship under another false identity. When police cornered him, he didn't resist, just smirked and said, "She was always too clever for her own good." His calmness chilled everyone. The charges included multiple counts of child endangerment, attempted assault, and obstruction of justice, based on Julia's statements and new witness testimony. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Julia, now 26, walked in with her head held high, flanked by detectives and her therapist. Her parents sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly, barely breathing. Julia took the stand on the third day. The room fell silent. She described everything: her memories, the day on the train, her years on the run, the pain of silence. Her voice wavered but never broke. Even the jury leaned in. Drew watched with a blank expression, occasionally shaking his head. His lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting false memory, therapy-induced narratives, even manipulation. But Julia's clarity was undeniable. Her journal entries, video diaries, and the emotional weight behind each word carried more truth than any cross-examination could unravel. One moment sealed the case. The prosecution presented Drew's notebook, highlighting the repeated phrase, "She was supposed to forget." A forensic handwriting expert confirmed it matched samples from his teaching materials. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Julia didn't cry. She closed her eyes and breathed out as if exhaling a decade's worth of weight. Drew was sentenced to 22 years with no parole for the first 18. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Julia stepped forward. "This isn't just justice for me," she said, voice steady. "It's for anyone who's ever been told to be quiet. I'm done being quiet." Her words spread across news outlets, social media, and survivor groups. She became a symbol, not of pain, but of power reclaimed. That night, Mark lit a candle at the dinner table. No empty chair this time. Julia sat beside her mother, not as the girl they lost, but as the woman they found. Life after the trial wasn't simple, but it was finally real. Julia moved into a small apartment just a few blocks from her parents' house. She painted the walls soft green, grew herbs on the windowsill, and adopted an elderly rescue dog named Olive who refused to sleep anywhere but at her feet. Therapy continued, not as a necessity but as a choice, a steady thread helping her weave herself back together. She enrolled in online classes, pursuing psychology with a focus on trauma care. "If I made it out," she told her counselor one day, "maybe I can help others make it too." Every Sunday, she met her parents for dinner. They laughed more now, even at old wounds. Sometimes tears came anyway, and that was okay. On the one-year anniversary of the trial, Julia organized a quiet gathering in Whisper Bay. Survivors, advocates, and therapists came together on the cliffside where she had first reunited with her family. There were no speeches, no media, just a bonfire, candles, and space to simply exist. Near the end of the night, Evelyn pulled Julia aside. "You could have vanished forever," she said softly. "But you didn't. You came back." Julia smiled. brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "I never left you. I just forgot how to find the way back." Mark walked over, slipping his arm around both of them. "You taught us something," he said. "That surviving is its own kind of strength." As the fire crackled behind them and the waves crashed below, Julia looked out over the water, the wind curling around her like a soft echo. The same ocean that once represented distance now felt like a bridge, vast, yes, but crossable. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the necklace Drew had given her all those years ago, the symbol of silence. Without a word, she tossed it into the sea. It caught the firelight for a moment before sinking beneath the waves. Gone. Forgotten only in weight. She turned back toward the fire, toward the people who had never stopped looking, never stopped loving, toward herself. And for the first time in 12 long years, she felt entirely, irrevocably free.